The courtroom erupted in cruel laughter as an old veteran's voice cracked, begging to keep his family's land. Then, the heavy door slammed open. A four-star general strode in, dropping a bombshell that shattered the silence. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The silence that followed was so absolute it felt violent, like something had been ripped out of the room. Even Prescott's smirk twitched and fell. Walter didn't turn his head. He couldn't. His shoulders stiffened. His grip tightened around the handle of his cane, and his lips pressed into a line that trembled despite his effort. Halverson's voice echoed through Walter's bones like thunder rolling over a battlefield he thought he'd long forgotten. The judge cleared her throat, visibly rattled. "You may proceed, General Halverson." The general stopped beside Walter's table. "Ma'am, I won't take more than a moment. I was informed this morning that my friend, my brother in arms, was being dragged into court over a patch of land, a patch that means nothing to men like Mr. Prescott except numbers on a ledger. But to this man?" He turned to Walter, voice lowering, heavier now. "It's his father's sweat, his mother's tears. It's the tree he planted after his wife died, the soil that still carries the ashes of his youngest son." Walter bowed his head. The old man had kept it all inside, years of holding tight the pieces of what remained, but now it began to seep out in silence, in the way his throat pulsed, in the twitch of a knuckle whitened from gripping too hard. Every muscle in his body was locked tight against the coming collapse. "He won't say all that," Halverson continued, "because that's not who he is. Walter Briggs doesn't talk about pain. He eats it, lives with it, folds it into him like another scar on top of the rest. But I will speak it for him if no one else here has the decency." Prescott tried to rise, a protest forming, but Halverson didn't even look at him. "When I was pinned under enemy fire in Quang Tri," he said, eyes locked on the judge, "I had 3 minutes left to live. I'd accepted it. And then Walter came for me. No cover, no orders, just that damn stubbornness in his heart. He took a round in the shoulder, dragging me out, and he never once cursed me for it. He just smiled and said, 'Don't let 'em put my name on no stone.'" He paused. His jaw worked silently for a moment. "So I won't." Walter still hadn't spoken, but the tears were there now, thin lines carving through leathery cheeks, falling into a lap filled with old medals and forgotten prayers. His hands didn't shake, but his eyes did. They searched the room like a man trying to find his footing while the earth beneath him cracked. "I buried my son 6 years ago," Walter whispered suddenly, the words barely catching the air. "Right there, under the pecan tree behind the barn. Tommy loved it there, said the wind sounded like music through the leaves." His voice broke, just once. "They want to dig that up, pave it, turn it into a parking lot." Prescott shifted in his seat, uncomfortable now, the weight of the room no longer tilting in his favor. Walter looked up, finally, his gaze sharp despite the mist in his eyes. "This ain't just a fight over property. It's a fight over memory, over dignity, over what a man leaves behind when everything else is gone." The judge blinked fast, her expression unreadable now. Behind her, the bailiff had stopped pretending to be bored. The clerk had closed her laptop. And in the gallery, even the smirking attorneys had gone quiet. General Halverson laid a hand on Walter's shoulder, firm, protective, like steel. "I may not wear the stars anymore," he said, voice steely and calm, "but I will go to war again, if I have to. For him. For this." Walter didn't speak again. He couldn't. He just nodded. Once. Slow. It wasn't anger anymore. It was pain, and it filled the room like smoke from a burning house no one had bothered to save. The moment the gavel struck, it felt like thunder had cracked open the roof. Gasps rippled through the courtroom, some stunned, some joyful, and a few bitter with defeat. But through it all, Walter Briggs remained still, motionless as a statue carved from time itself. His hands rested in his lap, knotted and calloused from 7 decades of labor and loss. He didn't speak, didn't blink. He simply looked down at the sun-faded patch stitched to his jacket. 1st Cavalry Division, Vietnam. The same patch he'd stitched on the night before he shipped out in 1967. The same one he'd refused to replace even as the edges frayed and the colors faded. That patch had seen jungle rot and burial dirt. It had survived the fire, the flood, and now this courtroom. A single tear escaped down the curve of his cheek, not a tear of grief, but of something rarer, something sacred, hope fulfilled. Across the aisle, Daniel Prescott sat frozen in disbelief. His skin had gone pallid, the bravado wiped clean from his face, like chalk in the rain. He looked not at the judge, nor at the general, but straight ahead, into nothing. The confidence of Silver Range Holdings had evaporated, replaced by the unmistakable scent of reckoning. General Halverson, still standing beside Walter, exhaled with the tightness of a man who'd just returned from another kind of war. His shoulders relaxed for the first time all day. "You did it, Walt," he said, voice low, private. "You made it home, again." A few feet away, reporters scribbled frantically, their pens a blur of disbelief and inspiration. The story was too rich to ignore. An old veteran defending sacred land against a corrupt empire, rescued not by lawyers, but by a comrade in arms and the undeniable weight of truth. But Walter wasn't thinking of the headlines. He was thinking about the old barn that leaned crooked in the morning light, about the creak of the porch swing he'd built with his father in '49, about the pecan tree where Tommy's ashes slept, untouched now, safe from bulldozers and false claims, about the promise. He'd whispered it once, in a muddy foxhole with mortars falling around them, to a frightened kid from Ohio who died the next day. "If I get out of this, I'm going back to that dirt. Gonna keep it. Gonna build something that don't fall apart." Now, 57 years later, he had. The gallery began to rise, some in applause, some out of awe. Even the judge stood, her expression unreadable, but her posture unmistakably respectful. She gave Walter a slight nod, nothing official, but deeply human. Halverson helped Walter to his feet, and the old man stood tall, not by strength of body, but by something deeper, something buried in marrow and memory. He turned to the gallery, to the reporters, to the clerk who'd laughed at his accent, to the attorneys who saw him as nothing more than a statistic, and for the first time that day, he spoke with a voice clear and sure. "I ain't no hero. I'm just a man who kept his word." That was all. He stepped down from the stand not as a victim, not as a plaintiff, but as something else entirely. As a victor, as a steward of something money couldn't touch. As Walter passed Prescott's table, the corporate lawyer opened his mouth, perhaps to protest, perhaps to beg, but Walter didn't even glance his way. Some wars didn't end with an apology. Some just ended. Outside the courthouse, sunlight bathed the steps in gold. Walter paused at the top, breathing deep. The cane tapped once more as he descended, but this time it wasn't the sound of burden. It was the rhythm of a march completed. Below, waiting at the curb, were two of his grandchildren, their faces lit up with wonder and pride. They didn't speak, just ran to him. Walter dropped the cane and opened his arms. The morning sun spilled over the courthouse steps like a baptismal flood, casting long shadows that stretched across the sea of microphones, cameras, and eager faces waiting to capture the aftermath of a battle far older and fiercer than any court docket could contain. Reporters jostled, their breath visible in the crisp air, murmuring headlines as they hammered away on keyboards and whispered into cell phones. They laughed at a veteran's accent, but they didn't know who was listening. The phrase echoed through social media, shared 1,000 times before the sun even fully rose. Walter Briggs stood just beyond the press frenzy, a quiet figure amid the noise. The familiar weight of his cane grounded him like a sentinel's staff. His faded jacket, patched with decades of memories and service, seemed to absorb the morning light instead of reflecting it. He refused every request for an interview, brushing off questions with a soft southern drawl that belied the storm of emotions inside. "I just done what any man ought to do," he'd say. "Ain't no hero here." But behind him, standing tall and resolute, General Rex Halverson became the voice Walter declined to raise. Halverson spoke with the measured gravitas of a man forged in fire and tempered by years of leadership. "This man," Halverson declared to the sea of microphones, "taught me a lesson I'll carry as long as I breathe. Courage isn't always loud or polished. It doesn't always wear a shiny uniform or speak perfect English. Sometimes courage limps into a courtroom on a worn cane and stands alone against giants. But it stands, unwavering." The words carved themselves into the hearts of listeners. For many, it was a revelation that true valor dwells not in medals or grand speeches, but in stubborn dignity and an unyielding grip on one's roots. Behind the headlines, the fallout was swift and unforgiving. Silver Range Holdings became a target of multiple investigations probing their practices. Prescott, once a titan of corporate confidence, resigned in disgrace, his carefully built facade shattered under the weight of exposure. Meanwhile, Walter's granddaughter, Emily, emerged from the shadows with a fire kindled by her grandfather's struggle and triumph. Briggs Roots, a nonprofit founded in the weeks following the trial, rose like a beacon dedicated to protecting veteran-owned farmland from the creeping claws of corporate greed. Emily spoke with fierce passion at community gatherings, rallying farmers, veterans, and activists alike. "Land is more than dirt," she told a packed auditorium. "It's history, it's legacy, it's love that lives beyond us. We fight not just for acreage, but for identity." And Walter? Walter continued the quiet work of a lifetime. Every morning before dawn, he wandered his 11 acres with arthritic fingers, tracing the earth, planting seeds with deliberate care. His cane tapped a rhythm that echoed the cadence of old wars and new promises. Sometimes children from the nearby town joined him, laughter mixing with the hum of cicadas and the scent of fresh soil. Sometimes Emily was there, kneeling beside him, hands dirtied, but spirits lifted. Occasionally General Halverson came by, his presence a steady comfort rather than a spectacle. Two old soldiers, now far from battlefields, sitting side by side on Walter's creaking porch. Words were sparse because neither man needed to fill the silence with noise. Their shared history spoke volumes, in the worn wood beneath their feet, in the scars etched faintly on their hands, in the quiet strength that settled like a shield around them. Sometimes Halverson would break the silence, a dry chuckle escaping his lips. "Funny, huh? How the hardest fights aren't with guns. They're with heart and grit." Walter would nod slowly, eyes fixed on the horizon where sky-kissed land. And both, they deserve honor. There, beneath the fading light of day, two warriors found peace. Not in victory parades or roaring crowds, but in the simple truth that some battles endure beyond the battlefield, fought quietly in courts, in fields, in hearts. And some victories, though silent, echo louder than any gunshot ever could.